Continuing with day 71. Now, the astrologer had one great favor with the king. The king sought his counsel often, and the king offered him an apartment in the palace. But Ibrahim Ibn, he wanted a cave in the mountain where the Alhambra now stands to put up his residency. And he had the cave enlarged to a certain extent and brought in furnishings. And it was quite a beautiful spot to live. He'd also had burrowed up from the ceiling of the cave a hole so that at night he could look out upon the starry sky. Now, there was one day where the king was complaining about these marauders coming in from all directions and how he could never quite keep them at bay. And he went on and on for quite some time, and when he had stopped, well, Ibrahim, he commented and he said, "You know, king, when I lived in Egypt, there was on a mountain a tower, and on this tower there was erected a ram, on top of which was a cock or a rooster, and these could swivel. Now, they were made of bronze, and an Egyptian priestess had imbued these talisman with unusual properties. Whenever the town was going to be under siege, the ram would turn in the direction where the approaching army was coming from, and the rooster would crow, alerting those there of the approaching army. "Allah be praised," said the king. If I could have such a thing as that, this would be wonderful." The king went on for a little bit. He was startled by something like that being possible at all. And when he was done going on about how wonderful it would be to have such a device, well, Ibn continued. And he said, "When I was younger and in Egypt, I had been told by one of the priests that I had been studying with, he said to me, you know, all this knowledge that you're gaining is actually really nothing compared to what is contained within a book that is supposedly buried deep in one of those pyramids that we can see from where we're sitting." Now, we were sitting on a little sand dune, and from our perch, we could see the incredible pyramids of Egypt. And he said that one of the priests who had overseen the building of the grandest of the pyramids laid buried in the center of that pyramid, and buried with him was this book. And the book was supposedly given to Adam after the fall and then passed down generation after generation until it fell into the hands of Solomon the Great. And Solomon the Great he built the mighty temple in Jerusalem using the knowledge that was from this book. And then the book had been lost, and how the priest had gotten it, well, only Allah knows. When I heard of this book, king, well, there was something in me that just wanted to have it. I wanted that knowledge. I wanted to study whatever was written within it. Now, I had at my command many of the soldiers that had been in that first army that had vanquished the area that we were living in. And I also had at my command many of the native Egyptians. And with this group of men, I went to the pyramid and I bore a hole into it. Eventually, I came upon a passage which led up into the pyramid. It was like a labyrinth of passages, but I wended my way until I came to the center of the pyramid itself, and there, on a sarcophagus, was buried the priest. I opened the sarcophagus, and one layer after another until I got to the mummy that was there, and I unwrapped the mummy, and there, on the breast of the priest, was this book. With trembling hands, I took it and made my way out of the dark and into the light. And for years I studied it, and I learned what was contained within it. King, I could build you something like what was in that tower above Borsa, perhaps even better. Well, the king was delighted at this prospect, and he said to Ibrahim, well, if you can do this, I will reward you with, well, whatever you'd like from the treasury. Well, Ibrahim said, let's not go there until the tower is built and the talisman are in place and we can see that they are working properly. So the king made available to Ibrahim everything that he needed in order to construct a tower that rose out of the palace itself. The top of the tower was a round room, and there were windows all around that room that went off in every direction. And on top of the tower, there was an Arabian steed with a knight upon it. And in that knight's hand was a lance that was pointed horizontally. Now, when things were at peace, that knight with his lance was pointed toward the city itself. But Abraham, once it was built, told the king that if there was a group of marauders that was coming toward the city, the knight would swivel in the direction of those marauders. Now, down below in that circular room, there was a board, almost like a chessboard with pieces upon it, but there were not squares. It was just a board, but like chess pieces. It was sitting on a little table, and that's all there was in that room. Those little pieces, and then a miniature little lance that was almost like a bodkin. Well, the king, once this all been constructed, was almost, well, excited to have somebody attack his kingdom so he could see, in fact, if this thing worked. It wasn't long before, in fact, the knight on top of the tower swiveled and pointed in the direction toward the pass of Lopez. The king got very excited by this, and with Ibrahim actually leading the king, a man much older than the king himself, leading the king up into that circular room, began to see what magic could be done. Now the king, when first the knight on the tower turned in the direction of the Pass of Lopez, he had called out and said, "Sound the battle drums, blow the trumpets, let us gather the army so we can go meet the marauders." But Abraham had told him, "King, there's no need for that. Come and I will show you." So once they were up in the tower in the circular room, they went to the table. And there on the table was the board with all those little pieces. And the little pieces were moving about. There were horsemen and little soldiers, and they were like careening about the board. The king looked at this in wonder. How could this be happening? Abraham then instructed the king as to why the pieces were moving he could do to invoke a response from the board and have an effect on the marauders. Now we'll leave the story there, and tomorrow we'll pick it up again. Okay, hope you have a great rest of your Sunday. Thanks for joining.